you know, there's a lot of interesting things that are going on in popular culture. I often try to avoid talking about those things, but some of these things are very much related to our proposition of how we understand humanity and what that looks like. And I've got two views that I think are perhaps, um, I think a lot of people would agree with me at this moment. That's probably in my scientific field. So mine is probably loosely, I'm a social scientist, loosely capturing things like economics as well as sociology and psychology. And the management field, that's kind of loosely where I'm in, is sort of studying these topics within organizations. They assume, they often very much assume that managers, that people are very benevolent, right? Like they actually are intending for good, right? Like they have this sort of view of this is a, we all kind of somewhat loosely agree upon what is a shared reality that we really want, a sort of good shared reality that we want, sort of a positive outlook. Um, and this is a really strong assumption, right? And I think I would borrow more from sociologists actually understand this a lot. And even though that they get a lot of flack, I love it. Um, but they understand this a lot is that, people are really different and they come at things in many different angles. And we don't really bring that in enough. We don't have this strong enough view that there is a lot of people and they're all incentivized for a lot of different reasons. They do things for many different reasons. One of which, and perhaps, even the minority of people do things because of sort of benevolence and sort of the betterment of everybody. I think most people have very strong, individual incentives to maximize their own outcomes at the cost of everything else. Right. I think that that's actually a really, really strong finding if you were to look this up. People are very self-centered in a lot of ways. Right. If it means something is going to be at the cost of their own, well-being, most people are not going to actually do that particular thing that is somewhat costly, right? The sort of, what do they call that? The social contract, right? From 300-400 years ago, this idea of the social contract by Hobbes. Um, I don't believe people actually want to do that most of the time. Now, there is a sort of in the management literature, there are people that sort of study, they call it, non-market strategy, right? But I think even with this non-market strategy, there is this spin. So the idea is to get around using markets, um, in an economic sense, because markets often fail. Um, that there are that you have to get around it and manage the process and use like non-market actors like politics and things like that, right? Um, but there's still somewhat of an assumption with a lot of this literature that people are really well intentioned and that the firm itself has a incentive for betterment of the world and everybody's hunky dory. um and I mean, I've never liked that view. I've always been much more of a sociologist, and I think that there is as many um, very bad actors in this world as there are really good actors in this world, right? And maybe to some degree in some populations there's really good actors. There's more, but in others there's like we have to really consider look at that and pay attention to that. But the difference between good and bad is often sort of contextual, how we understand it. It's often, people sort of fall into things unintentionally. Most people don't view themselves as bad, even though that they're doing, criminal acts, um, all these kind of things. I think that it's a very nuanced, difficult thing to sort of look at, and recognize a sort of value judgment of good and bad, and um, but we have to realize that the world is far more complicated, right? It's not a simplistic world. Um, that the idea behind, the sort of basic premises that companies always kind of want to relatively do good. Managers are relatively benevolent, like they want to sort of steer people in the right direction. If you're gonna actually look at this stuff and study this, you'll see that there's lots of people that would argue otherwise. And the basic idea is that companies would fall apart if enough people are being mean and nasty, but it's just not true, right? Like companies sustain themselves, even though people are mean and nasty and they do bad things and, they cheat and steal and all of that kind of stuff. And I think that's the reality that we often have to sort of work with is um, acknowledging that this world is complicated, acknowledging that um, we're all messed up in various different ways, right? Even if you think that you are, working in the best interest of everybody, not everybody is going to see that, right? And you have to acknowledge these things that it is just a giant mess. That's all I wanted to say is let's get a little bit more realistic with these things. All right, take care. Have a wonderful day.